I'd like to call the meeting to order for the General Government Committee. Please conduct roll call.
Supervisor Jurdy?
Here.
Chair Brown?
Here, and it is 1:33, not 12:33. That was lunch. Okay, first item on the committee's agenda is discussion and possible direction regarding the development of a medical cannabis business license and zoning regulations for the dispensing, distribution, processing, testing, manufacturing, delivery, and transportation of cannabis. Staff, go forward.
Good afternoon, Standing Committee. Sarah Duquette, Executive Office, and today I also have Andy Gustavin, Chief Planner, Sherry Schattmeyer, Treasurer Tax Collector, and Dave Jensen, Director of Environmental Health. Back in March, the board originally heard recommendations about moving forward with all license types, and the board expressed interest. And then in May 16th, it was recorded in the minutes that you wished for staff to move forward in developing some recommendations and working on a draft ordinance. So that is why we are here today. So I'm just going to briefly go over kind of a timeline that we have mapped out and some of our initial recommendations that we're using as we develop the ordinance. So here's this. So we are here today to bring forward recommendations on a cannabis facilities business license and zoning recommendations, and we anticipate between now and November we can bring forward the recommendations and receive input from the Standing Committee, the public, and interested agencies, and move forward with releasing a draft ordinance in December and January, followed by really fine-tuning that information so we can bring it to the full board and receive their feedback, do the environmental review, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about zoning and what we anticipate, but we're expecting a much shorter process for this. And then in March and April, having it go to the Planning Commission, and finally adoption by the board in April or May, so we can launch fairly soon and not be too behind the cultivation ordinance. So do you have any questions on the timeline?
I do not, do you,
No.
Supervisor? But I do want to thank you. I think it's really important to have this timeline. It helps not only the board members know how we're moving forward, but the public as well, so I really appreciated it.
So sorry, it's a little slow. I'm going to bring up the other item. So just to give you a little bit of background, we brought forward the tax ordinance, which is before the voters in November, and that has a tax for a cannabis business license. We kind of also follow the business license model, which is why we have the Treasurer Tax Collector here, and that's the proposed model that we're bringing for you today, that it will be a business license specific to cannabis, and there'll be multiple departments involved in the review. So we have, as part of the packet, if it will come up here, it's a little slow on loading, but it is on the website, a chart. And on the chart, we have the license type, the proposed zoning and setback, some general requirements, and what that license type looks like in the state. So I'll just go down the list of these. So first we have a dispensary, and we're also going to include in that a storefront for nursery. And right now we have mobile delivery included for a dispensary. And I will let Andy talk about the proposed zoning and setbacks for each one.
So the overarching concept to apply the cannabis facilities types into our zoning code is to look to our zoning use classification types and then see where they would be permitted today. So that chart up, I don't know if you have this, and it'll be landing on the screen soon. lists the various facility types and then the zoning districts in which they would be located. This proposal will probably come forward to the committee in the future as recommending marijuana or cultivation specific types of facilities. So while a dispensary, a testing lab might be, I'm sorry, let me go to the best example, processing facility. Under our current zoning code, we have processing as agricultural product, and there's general processing, and then we also have processing wineries. So wineries is a specific type of processing facility with very specific type of effects. We would probably come back with a processing cannabis facility, which could be then subject to tailored types of review, or more specifically located in zoning districts where it might be best suited. So that's sort of a technique we envision would be used, in particular where we're having to identify unique setback requirements from youth-oriented facilities, such as is the case. That's really it. I mean, we'll be using the same sort of regulatory scheme, zoning clearances, minor and major use permits.
So I have a question. Can I ask a question? So I'm going to preface it by saying I have not received any complaints about any of the existing medical dispensaries in Mendocino County. However, because of the proposition on the ballot to legalize recreational marijuana, I'm thinking that's why it sort of prompted a couple of concerns people have raised with me in the last few weeks, and as they're aware of that possibility. And so the question that's come up is, will a state, or is this a county, is there an opportunity for the county to have a role relating to the sale of products that are infused products that might be appear to be marketed towards kids? And whether it's infused candies or chocolates or whatever. I mean, I know that there already are those products, but right now my understanding is someone would be coming in with a prescription for cannabis, and so I guess the concern that's been raised to me is if it's legalized for recreational, even though it will be adult for 21, they're just concerned that some products might be marketed in a way that are attracting kids, even if they get someone over 21 to go into the store and buy it. So I guess the question is this something that the state's going to be regulating, or is there an opportunity for the county to discourage marketing and packaging that looks like it's geared towards kids?
I think both. The state was working on their guidelines, but we, of course, can do more. I would kind of relate it to how we handle tobacco and kind of limiting signage and limiting different things in that arena. We can kind of look at the tobacco model of what we've done locally and what other jurisdictions have done locally to reduce tobacco use in youth, and see if we can have some similarities with cannabis as well. And then, of course, you can make the decision whether how you want to treat edibles or infused candies or infused beverages. You can kind of determine how you want to treat them at the local level, if that's something you want to allow, or if you want certain requirements. I don't know if Dave Jensen has anything to add. I don't know if it's been a discussion yet at the Public Health, but they're the ones working on the regulations, Department of Public Health and the Bureau in terms of packaging, but Department of Public Health in terms of manufacturing that kind of product.
David Jensen, Environmental Health Director. Very good question, Mr. Jurdy. There are a lot of questions regarding to the manufacture and also the sale of edibles or infused products. It's frustrating where I sit to be tackling this in the absence of clear state directives and regulations. It's very difficult. We're doing our best. What I can point to is are the regulations in the other states that have already legalized recreational use. particularly the states of Washington, Oregon, and Colorado. And all three of those states have expressly demanded or required that the packaging of edibles be such that they're not geared towards the underage market, so that they're not catering to the likes and the preferences of children. All three states have made that very clear. So I anticipate that when we see the California regulations, they'll also make that explicit. And certainly anything that we, the county, come forward with will have that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So to come back to the chart up here, we have each of the license types. For all of them, we carry over that 1,000 feet from a youth-oriented facility, a school, a park, or any church or residential treatment facility. It goes along the lines of the youth and policy statement that you adopted, and continues that 1,000-foot setback as we've had with cultivation. You'll see some zoning areas. The first one permitted is the ideal location where they don't really have to do anything additional. So for dispensary, we have commercial 1 and commercial 2, and then below there, other zones that it's allowed in with either a minor and major use permit. And like Andy said, we've looked at similar use types of different businesses that would be in these similar categories and what we require them to do. And that's kind of the basis of where we got a lot of the proposed zoning, and it's still a work in progress, but this is just some initial thoughts. Then we have some general requirements. All of them will have an application. We are looking at having background checks in the Act for license types outside of cultivation. They do have to receive a background check. We're trying to do everything we can to make sure we're not going to be handing out any business licenses to people that won't be eligible at the state level, to kind of reduce having to revoke licenses. So we have a background check currently in there. We also have a site plan. It's our goal to have all of the aspects that we'll be looking for and need to review in one site plan, so that it can easily be routed to planning and building, to environmental health, and it's kind of the quickest and easiest, most efficient way. So having a site plan that they can go through and put together, and it's all in one place. We also want to make sure that these areas are secure because of the type of product they're selling, and we want to make sure that all of them have appropriate security measures. There's a couple for processing, testing, and manufacturing for waste disposal protocols, and we will be working with solid waste to make sure that we have everything that we need the various businesses to comply with, to making sure waste is handled properly. And then on the last column, we have the type of permits that would be allowed under the state. And I just want to point out processing. So we received a desire from the cannabis community that they'd like to see a processing permit so that cultivators can kind of have like a co-op model place to do some light processing. So that's kind of the reason why we have this processing in there. So it's not quite to the level of a manufacturing permit from the state, but it allows for multiple cultivators to bring their product to one place and do a lot of that light processing. So that's kind of the chart. Do you have any questions on any of this before we move on?
I don't.
Neither do I. So go forward. Thanks.
So the next couple pages, pages 2, 3, and 4, are a description of what each use type is. And you'll notice in dispensaries, we also point to the mobile delivery, which is allowed under the Act, and we also include the nursery dispensary as well. We have kind of additional special requirements that are throughout, just a couple of them. Participation, all of them will have participation in a track and trace program. For dispensaries, we have hours of operation limited to 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. All of them will have a 21 age requirement. We're working on signage provisions to making sure that we don't have too many signs all over the place, and we're kind of looking at tobacco models, how they've done in limiting signage so that it doesn't entice youth. Paraphernalia provisions, making sure a lot of that stuff isn't in a window display case kind of thing, and on-site consumption prohibited for dispensary. So most of them are a carryover to all of them. Some of them have specific requirements like the waste disposal. The testing laboratory is a little bit specific. We kind of pulled the language from the Act in terms of what they need to do with the California State Department of Public Health. And then I just will quickly go into the last page, page 5, which talks about the process, or the process we're envisioning. So a lot of the actors in the permitting process is going to be the treasurer tax collector, who will be the person that will be taking the applications. Planning and building and environmental health are two big ones. So we kind of outlined what we see the application process being, them submitting everything in one packet to the treasurer tax collector, who will review it for completeness, making sure that they have their live scan background checked by the sheriff's office. Then the treasurer tax collector will review and then route the site plan and the other items to the various departments for approval. So we have planning and building, environmental health, sheriff, different things like that, depending on what license type they're going to be applying for, and there'll be the provisions outlined of what they need to include. Once the departments review it, they'll provide recommendations on the application to the treasurer tax collector, and after there's any physical inspections that might be needed. The reviewing county departments or other public agencies may include conditions for the operation of medical cannabis facilities with its recommendations. The treasurer tax collector will verify that the applicant has a valid county licenses or permits or other approvals they need prior to issuing. Once everything's in order and they've completed everything they need to do, the treasurer tax collector will issue the business license to applicants. Now, this business license will be good for 1 year at the date of issuance. All county medical cannabis facility licenses are provisional until a valid state license under the act is verified. So right now we have the language in here that will be going out first, but once that state licenses are available and they apply for them, that once they're issued to it within 5 days, we need to be verified and receive a copy of that. If the medical cannabis facility is denied a state license, the local county business license will become invalid. And the last one is, as of January 1, 2019, the medical cannabis facility business license will be immediately revoked upon one or more of the following events occurring: notification to the county that the state has revoked a state license issued under the act, or a failure to maintain a valid and current state license. So that's just kind of a general overview of what we're envisioning.
Well, my comment is I thought it was very well thought out, especially with a first draft like this, and very complete. I did find a couple clerical errors, which I will get to you within the document, and it can be corrected. And I see Sherry looking at me. Page 5, they didn't put an R at the end of treasurer. So it says treasure, treasure. So proper spelling. And then there's one other one also on page 2. So have 2 of those. Supervisor Jurdy, do you have any comment?
It doesn't. It may be broad. It's broader than this ordinance, but again, I think this topic has sort of generated some community discussion in general. And so I know in most of Mendocino County, businesses tend to be scattered around. You know, they have their own individual parking lot. They're fairly spread out. But there are clusters of businesses in Mendocino County, like the town of Mendocino. So this comment related specifically to the comment I heard about Mendocino. And the comment was, does the county, which I actually don't know the answer to this, does the county have a prohibition on smoking cigarettes, or perhaps with legalization, cannabis within, say, 30 feet of a store entrance? So for example, in Fort Bragg, that's the city code. And I don't know if the county has a similar code. I realize that those issues are all get down to enforcement, and there isn't a sheriff deputy, you know, walking the streets of Mendocino every afternoon or every morning. So that's not necessarily something that's going to be heavily enforced, but this was a request that came up from someone, and it would apply to both tobacco smoke and cannabis within so many feet of a store entrance, so that someone walking down the sidewalk isn't breathing someone else's secondhand smoke.
You know, I'm not sure about if we have something on the books in regards to tobacco, but I think that's a valid point, and we can look at maybe developing something if you want to bring that forward, especially with legalization as a potential, if you'd like to have something, so we can assure that it's treated appropriately.
Sure. And Mr. Jensen, does we have some, I thought there were some rules about smoking in restaurants.
Yes,
Can
there
you-
are about smoking in restaurants. You know the old joke, this may be borderline inappropriate, but a smoking section in a restaurant is like yeah, it is inappropriate. Never mind. In a pool, another section in a pool. So, yes, we do have a prohibition against, and I believe that's a state law.
I do too.
Yeah. I'm not aware of county regulation against smoking in public at this point, other than, as you say, in the city of Fort Bragg.
And I do know that individual outside areas, I think it's, the restaurants set that themselves.
Yes.
I do believe there is ordinances from other counties where there's no smoking in parks or at recreational facilities. Those are the ones I do remember.
I don't know what the state of California has in mind for cannabis consumption, recreational or otherwise, but it is my imperfect understanding that it's either Colorado, Washington, or both of them prohibit the consumption of cannabis, recreational cannabis, in public. I think it's restricted to your
I think you're
private
right.
areas.
Yeah, because I've gone over that and heard discussions both with the Rural Counties Association and CSAC. And Ms. Angelo, you have comment.
Yes, our risk manager just emailed us to say that there is an ordinance. We do have a chapter, a smoking chapter in the Mendocino County Code.
We do.
So
So
we
maybe
certainly
we
print
can,
that for anyone or any member of the public if they'd like.
sure, and I think that would be good to go over
Yeah.
and to research it, to see what we have, what we don't have. Of course, we do not regulate within city limits, so was unaware of what Supervisor Jurdy talked about, but for the city of Fort Bragg, but I'm imagining probably the other cities also have regulation. I know we, so many feet away from buildings, we have for our county buildings. There's airports, some are absolutely no smoking unless it's in a designated area. So there's a whole menu of ordinances and regulation that we can look at.
And we can look and seeing if we can update our current one to include cannabis, or we can pursue, like some of the other states, a no consumption in public. We can bring back recommendations for both.
I think if it turns out we have a policy, I think revising that makes more sense than starting from scratch. And again, I was unfamiliar with whether or not the county had this. This was just a concern someone brought up with me, and they were specifically focusing on Mendocino, and as an example, where stores are fairly close together and close to the sidewalk.
And then the other thought I have as well, I know hospitals, schools, the college, elementary schools, they do have prohibition on their grounds. So those are areas we can look for language as well.
Okay, so that would come back at some future meeting. Okay.
All righty, we'll go to public comment. Anyone that would like to comment on this, please come forward, state your name for the record.
Good afternoon, Hannah Nelson. Couple of things. First, I just want to note that I did send an email to every supervisor, as well as tried several times to contact staff regarding having stakeholder meetings for input. And so I just want to say that the amount of public comment that will repeatedly come up could have been minimized potentially with the involvement, and it's never too late. I don't expect some ad nauseum ongoing stakeholder meetings, but at least some input for people who have practical on-the-ground knowledge of some of the ins and outs, and particularly like me, who are following very, very closely what's happening at the state level, would really benefit. And I'm disappointed that nobody responded to my request. Manufacturing, I'm hoping that there can be a carve-out for on-site, low-tech, not sophisticated. Apparently, when people are trimming their cannabis, the shake and the leaf and everything that falls out can, with ice water and whatnot, be turned into other usable product without any sophisticated methods. And I just think that if we're trying to protect small farmers here in our county, one thing that we should think about as a practical matter is if they all of a sudden have to, and I'm all for safety and fire hazard and every other kind of check on this, but if there are ways to carve out on-site, low-tech, I guess it would technically be called manufacturing, but not of the typical turning it into some elaborate other product. I just want to put that out there. The other thing regarding processing, as Sarah indicated, the state doesn't have a separate processing license, and it was us that requested a potential to pool. But one of the difficulties is that the chart doesn't allow RR zoning. And again, if we're trying to protect small farmers, that might be something that we want to consider again with the appropriate checks. With respect to background checks, be careful because the state doesn't automatically deny people who are convicted of certain crimes. They may deny a license. So I would hate for prematurely us at the local level to deny people who are eligible at the state level. And the other issue is kind of the bud and breakfast model. I think you received a letter. I have a number of clients who are interested in developing jobs and tourism in similar to wineries, and then carve out for tasting rooms and also staying and ecotourism combined with the cannabis industry. So I'd like that to be on the radar as well. And finally, the length of time for processing the application once it's submitted and having the various agencies give their report back and whatnot, it would be helpful to have some kind of handle on the length of time it would take to go through that process, or whether there's an obligation of the county to process the applications within a certain period of time, of course, within reason. And it also is going to be important for you all to have some mechanism for the local government to provide certification to the state that licensees at the local level are in good standing, because before somebody can get a state license, they're going to need that proof from the local government if there is a permitting scheme in place. And that's it. Thank you.
So I
Yes.
do have a question for you as a follow-up. So you're saying that the state may deny a license for someone who has a conviction. Have they adopted, or will they be adopting standards for when they would
Right.
consider?
So I've been to quite a few pre-regulatory meetings at the state level for all the different agencies, and it's still something being wrestled with. There is a strong contingent at the state level to recognize that, like Oakland is trying to redress people who had conviction as a result of the war on drugs and actively encourage licensing people who are in the cannabis business lawfully who once had a conviction for it. Other voices are saying, no, we've got to be more careful. There does seem to be a general feeling that a cannabis-specific conviction should not in and of itself be enough to deny somebody a license, but those regulations have not yet been written.
So long story short, we're still waiting. And, but good question, and that was brought out at the RCRC meeting that 3 of us attended at the end of September. But I also want to clear up a misconception by yourself. Staff has really been working hard. They have a lot of
Oh, I
different
believe that.
matters and issues on their plate, and quite honestly, in my opinion, this is one supervisor speaking, all county residents are stakeholders in this process.
Sure.
Not just those at.
Absolutely.
And so the General Government Committee, Board of Supervisors meetings, that's the perfect place for all stakeholders from all the communities we have here in Mendocino County to participate.
First off, I couldn't agree with you more that staff has been working very hard, and I appreciate their efforts, and my comment was not in any way to demean their efforts in any way. But I do believe when there are people with specialized knowledge in an industry that is a little bit foreign to people who haven't been actively participating in it, it does cut down. And you're right, it's open to, I'm not limiting it to certain special interest groups. I'm saying anybody with specialized helpful information that could help winnow down some of the practical applications so that when these rules are being discussed, it's not just in the abstract. That's all I meant.
And so we know you're available if and when we need that expertise, and I appreciate you offering it. So thank you.
Sure.
Can I just add one thing for background checks? We are looking at other jurisdictions, what they have on the books. One of them that comes to mind is the County of Santa Cruz, and they have a background check language currently in their dispensary ordinance, but we are looking at other jurisdictions to see what we can have in place until we have that hard regulation from the state of what the different agencies will be looking for each license type. And hopefully we can provide language that as soon as those come online, that becomes our standard to look for.
And I think it is important to compare them as well. It's kind of like carrying firearms in a vehicle. You pass from one county line into another county, and there's different rules. You go from the unincorporated areas into a city, again, there are different rules. So, I just think it's important to compare as well. What is going on, especially on the North Coast. So it's not as, it's not regulated in many different ways. So most citizens are not confused with that. I don't know, do you have any comment on that as well? No? Okay. Anyone else? Come forward, Casey, state your name for the record.
Casey O'Neill, local farmer, board chair for California Growers Association. I've been part of this process since it got going. I appreciate it still happening. I got a few comments. One of the things that we're really seeing in the community is a need for some sort of provisional transport. We have farmers who can legally cultivate. They're going to turn it into finished product, and then it needs to go somewhere. To make sure that it's not being diverted into the black market, it's very important that it be able to be legally transported to dispensaries, to distributors. Distributors are coming into the county. They are transporting out of the county. They're still very much, it's this really gray area where if they get pulled over, we all have transport manifests. We have documentation that shows what the product is, where it's going, what it's supposed to, what's supposed to happen with it. But some sort of provisional licensure from the county would be huge. In Colorado, they did this kind of funny thing where they issued what they called a green card, and they said, all right, this guy has a provisional license to transport, and so something along those lines would be very helpful. Also, I'm a representative for a local cooperative of a whole bunch of small farmers getting going. Co-ops haven't really figured into the discussion much yet, and so we're trying to figure out, we're looking at office space and trying to be able to do basic like aggregation, test samples, send samples out for testing, these kinds of things. No retail type of things, but more specifically like helping farmers get their act together so that when the distributor comes, we have an economy of scale so that we can, not end up getting essentially put out of business by high costs, because if the distributor has to go to each individual farm, that's not going to work. They're going to charge way too much, and we're not going to make it. If AUMA passes, one of the interesting things about it is that it says that no cannabis criminal conviction can be a grounds for no license. So that's kind of one of those things that's still up in the air. We'll see how that goes come November. one of the things we're really looking at is this idea of clustering of businesses, so that, for instance, there could be the distributor, the processor, the testing lab, because if those things are all in separate locations and there's a transport in between, that's just an added cost. So if the farmer can bring raw product to the processor, it can get processed, it can go to the distributor can have it tested, and then it can go to market. That's going to cut down on the overall costs dramatically. In looking at the permit chart, I'm always super nervous about heavy use permit requirements. I totally recognize the need for community input and to make sure that we're not locating these things in places where neighbors and such don't want them. But at the same time, I just remain leery about the fact that we have this thing operating now. We have legal permitted cultivation, and if we're not able to do the other steps of the thing very, very soon, a lot of people are going to lose out, and it's going to really affect the industry here, because there's so many small farms who really are kind of on the bubble now, and there's a lot of big things happening in other counties. So this is something that, we just need to move forward with as quickly as possible, and I recognize it takes time, but that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
And you did see our timeline?
Definitely.
Okay. Anyone else?
Okay. Hi, my name is Mary Eigner, and I'm manager and one of the principals at the Lovin' It Cooperative in Mendocino. We've been in operation about 5.5 years now. And so I'm here because obviously, the county licensing and permitting process for cannabis dispensaries, I have a very deep interest in, as well as how the distribution model is going to come out, because those things are going to significantly affect my ability to do business. And I guess basically what I'm here to say is that I think it's important that we be as inclusive as possible of all of the stakeholders. And I think that, that includes county government, regulatory agencies, the citizens of the county. But specifically within this industry, there are people who have been involved in different aspects of this for a long time. And we all have different experiences, skills, knowledge that we can bring to the table. Because as we go about drafting these things that is going to affect all of us, I think we have an opportunity here to really make good decisions and come up with some policies that are going to be really workable for the long term, although realizing that this is an industry that's very much in transition. It's probably going to take a good 10 years for everything to settle out. So we need to have provisions to go back and maybe adjust things moving forward. So really, I'm here to see how I can become involved in this process that is going to affect my business. Just for example, Supervisor Jurdy, you were saying about edibles targeted towards children. Edibles are an important delivery method, especially for older people and for people who have compromised respiratory system. And yeah, there are edibles out there that are totally targeted towards children. I won't carry those in my dispensary. But it's important that we do have, edibles that are, we have edibles that are complete CBD. They're not at all psychoactive. We have one we carry that has melatonin in it that helps people sleep. So just as you have different questions about different issues along those lines, I want to be able to offer myself as a resource in this process so that we can make the best decisions possible on this moving forward. So I guess my question to you is, how can I be involved in this process?
I'm going to answer as one county supervisor, just what you're doing today, because it should be a public process, one where the viewing public that couldn't make it here, or those that are working other jobs that can view it tonight or sometime soon, being here and being part of this public process is extremely important, and I appreciate that you're here and appreciate your comment.
Okay.
That's my opinion as one county supervisor. And I, just like Supervisor Jurdy, we do meet individually with constituents to hear what they have to say, and it could be on proposed legislation, ordinances, et cetera, and very happy to do that. But I think for the most part, everyone in the county is a stakeholder, and this public process is the right way to go.
Okay, thank you. One quick question. I know that Supervisor Hamburg had recused himself from participating in the cultivation aspects of the ordinance. Is he going to be participating in the other licensing process?
I don't think either one of us should answer that. Supervisor Hamburg should, as one of the supervisors, should be the one to make that decision.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Seeing no one, we'll move on to the next
Well,
item.
if I have a couple follow-up questions for staff from questions that were, issues that were raised up. The two issues that I believe were raised that I didn't think it would be helpful, we got a staff reaction to, was this idea of co-location. Now, the chart we have shows the different zoning districts in which these activities can take place. But just looking at it, I'm not, have you looked at these with that idea of co-location in mind with these?
Yeah, and I think dispensary, at least I felt this way when staff was explaining it, was addressing the co-op opportunity.
And you'll also see that many of the license types are allowed in the same area. So industrial, commercial, there's some differences a little bit in processing because you're going to be closer to the cultivator in some areas. But there are some areas where they're in the same zoning district. And I know we've briefly talked about this under cultivation of looking into some type of innovation zone type of scheme that Arcata did in terms of incentivizing people to develop in a certain area or certain properties or certain, so that's something to look at. But in terms of where they're allowed, you'll see that there's a trend in industrial, commercial, RC throughout all of the license types.
So as staff develops more details to these ordinances, are they contemplating that the ordinances be structured in such a way that if there was the right site, large enough parcel, great enough setbacks, that someone could actually co-locate, like say in an industrial piece of property, several of these activities
Yeah,
together?
there's no restriction on the number of cannabis businesses within a certain area or a certain industrial park. So, if there was enough industrial land where 3 different people wanted to open up businesses that support each other.
And when you stop to think about it, you can look at those industrial sites, and the one that really I'll use it as an example is the Louisiana Pacific Mill site that has sat vacant in Round Valley, Covelo, for a very long time. I believe it's still up for sale, but it has the infrastructure right now for the housing. And not sure at Willits, the former mill site there that is north of town, but I believe it's in the same circumstance where it's vacant and not being used, but they do have electrical, everything you would need for an industry to run. So there are those sites. I think of out at Branscombe. I don't know about that site or how well it is still equipped with facilities, but when you think about it, there are a number of them, areas within the county, especially in these rural areas, where you wouldn't have one big center like you would maybe in Ukiah Valley, where the industrial zone land is pretty much clustered together. And I'm thinking North Ukiah along North State Street, but those are certainly areas right now. And co-op that they talked about, that's what hit me just on the very first license type and facility business, including a storefront, nursery, dispensary, and mobile delivery. So it could operate as a co-op.
Andy Gustafson, Chief Planner. What I'd like to add to that is it's often the case we're defining or establishing the principal use of the property. There can be an incidental or an associated activity which is complementary, that can also occur with that principal use. An example might be a processing facility with a retail front that is subordinate to and incidental to that production. So that's another way to get that blend of uses that are related to one another. Sarah was speaking to more of a defined place or mix of uses in maybe an industrial district. Possibly we establish a overlay type zoning, a designation that provides a much more prescribed blend of uses, or it's just more clear that these uses might be developed together, function together as separate principal uses, different ownership possibly, but yet they're located together and are make sense in terms of production, processing, distribution, sale, testing, but those are all different tools that could be applied.
Absolutely.
The second issue that came up, and we did get it just late this afternoon, a letter email about this, and it was brought up in comment, was the idea of the bed and breakfast facility, and in which, I guess the question is, are we contemplating any kind of zoning that would allow either on a spot zone, case by case, or inventing a new zoning district that would allow this? Or have staff talked about this idea?
Again, Andy Gustafson, this is a concept that's been put out there, and to me, it's more a business type plan. Like a bed and breakfast doesn't advertise a wine and breakfast. It's it's a place where somebody has a transient type occupancy used for a limited number of guests to spend the night, and they may have food service and wine servings, and it might also, if marijuana is legalized for recreational use, the guests might be able to consume marijuana. So as a distinct separate type use, there may not be a need to call it out separately. And again, this will probably in part be defined or informed by state regulation, which may, in its regulatory scheme, not permit these within 1,000 feet of a youth-oriented facility. But that's the kind of regulation we currently live with under Bureau of Alcoholic and Beverage Control, where there are certain types of alcoholic beverage establishments where they are restricted in location next to a youth-oriented facility. So I don't know that there's a real strong need to establish a bed and breakfast, as I heard it was referred to, establishment in our zoning code. But we'll have to see how that plays out in the state regulations.
Well, along with whether legalization moves forward, and just a thought, if it does, and that's something that we want to allow in the county, we can work on, we might not need a separate zoning area for a bed and breakfast besides the 1,000 feet from a school, but we may want to look at whether it's a cannabis business license or some type of scheme so we know that it's being served. I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like, but I think it's been on all of our minds that that's kind of where this train is headed in terms of tourism, and that might also be a good topic for the general government committee to look at from an economic development standpoint, separate from necessarily this, but how you want to see those kind of ventures move forward or incentivize those type of ventures.
And my comment, Supervisor Jurdy, too, is all the years I worked in agriculture and agritourism. And you can have a very large piece of property, and depending on the zone, you may not be able to do the tourism you want to do. And I have seen huge clashes, and I'm going to use by name Holmes Ranch, where you had 5 acres or 7 acres of grapes. The landowners put in a mom and pop winery, and then they opened it to tasting. And that irritated the neighbors because of the traffic that imposed on the roads. And all of a sudden, out of that sprang up a bed and breakfast where you could come spend the weekend. And they actually got cited by Planning and Building Services. But it was a huge war up Holmes Ranch between all the residents. I do think agritourism is something this county can take advantage of, and we do need to look at that at some point in the future. That brings my thought to a soccer camp in Round Valley, where all the neighbors were opposed to it because to get down the private road, there were lots of people that used the private road, but yet that was going to be a commercial venture. So you can get yourself in really deep trouble and conflicts as we move forward with this. But certainly, tourism is something we have and we can make use of because we do have a beautiful county that people do want to come visit, but we need to be careful.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Anything else?
We will continue to work on the ordinance, and we're trying to get a draft ordinance out so that we can actually kind of get a first draft out. So we'll try to schedule something for December or January. I'm not really sure.
And
what
we
the-
do have it before the full board tomorrow just to look at,
Yeah,
correct?
just a general update.
So just so you all know,
No,
the Board of Supervisors, that's not timed, probably in the morning?
Morning.
Okay. Probably between 9 and noon, so.
So for clarification, what you're saying is the draft that staff is working on, you're thinking of bringing that to the November or the December General Government Committee meeting?
December.
December, okay.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next item. Thank you, staff, for those that aren't going to be here for the next item, and that's discussion and possible direction regarding the development of Mendocino County's 2017 legislative platform. Hannah, you shouldn't leave. You're talking about state regulation. This is our legislative platform for the year.
I know, but I've got other stuff I have to do.
Oh, okay.
And I'm back. Sarah Duquette, Executive Office.
Who?
Sarah.
I'm teasing.
Just me in here? Oh my gosh,
Hello?
it is just me. All right. The fun stuff. Legislation. So I started with reviewing the 2016 platform to make changes and updates since the close of the session and things that have been successful or maybe we want to add. So I'll just go through this and briefly go over the changes. I did reach out to departments on if they wanted to see certain things come in. I had some comments from the transportation director, so they made their changes, and I believe public health and health and human services are looking at possibly adding a few. So hopefully I'll hear back from them soon, and we can either decide to bring this back to the General Government Standing Committee one more time or just bring it to the full board. So I'll just start by...
I really think it needs to come back to this committee prior to
Sure.
going to the board. And there is a lot transpiring, as we heard, not only on a state level, but national level as well. And even our local area, as far as water's concerned, whether it's Sigma, Potter Valley Project, relicensing. I mean, there's just a lot that's right up in the air. And I just feel coming back, it would be a good thing.
And I want to make sure that Health and Human Services has enough time to make sure we add anything that they feel is important. So I'll just start by going through. If you go to page 6, under regulatory mandates and reform, we added in a section about the Mendocino County Employee Retirement Association Board of, and this came from Supervisor Jurdy of a
Nice.
letter that came from the retirement board on what they'd kind of like to see in terms of alternate trustee. And so that language from them has been included.
Thank you. So just to clarify, yeah, so as you said, the retirement board unanimously voted to request that this legislative change be adopted by the legislature, and they're hoping that the county has a little bit of, has some ability to move that along. That's maybe,
So what
more-
page?
Page 6, under regulatory mandates and reform.
Okay.
So the Retirement Association is part of a statewide association, but they also know that the county is part of rural counties and also part of CSAC, and they're thinking that either of those groups might be able to help work with us to get this then.
And also, I might mention that CSAC, I don't know if you saw it or not, Sarah, did an overview of their work this past legislative session and what they're looking forward to, what is...
On the
what-
horizon.
Yeah, on the horizon, I guess the best way to
Yeah.
put it. So I don't know if you saw that or not, but
I haven't read the big stack, but I've been looking through it. It's going to
Okay.
be another busy year.
yes, it is.
And then under transportation, we added a little bit of a section that really just is more Mendo specific. So when we get this ledge platform out, the people will have a better idea of our pavement condition index and our backlog of maintenance to kind of give a little bit more punch of, this is what we're really dealing with. And then on page 7, we added in a couple of things for transportation about what we've been facing since, September was the first month ever counties received $0 in price-based gas tax revenues. That was like a really big item that came up. And so that affected Mendocino County, and they had to cut the purchase of materials and equipment. So we wanted to, again, just continue to hit home as we move forward again with trying to get long-term funding for transportation to make it very clear that it's hitting us very hard, and the state needs to take some action.
And it fell through again
Yep.
this year.
Maybe 2017 we'll be lucky. There's quite a bit of changes in water since between the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, the stormwater permit, and Mendocino Lake. We have a lot going on. So I added support continued water conservation efforts. The state's really been pushing this, that even though the drought may vary from location to location, that they really want to see conservation efforts as a long-term thing. The next one is to support local reimbursements for the implementation of the stormwater requirements. There was a recent court case where Los Angeles County and another county sued the state saying, you're giving us unfunded mandates, and they were successful. So there's a lot going on right now. What does that mean? Can we get local reimbursement? So we've been following that very closely to see if there could be a possibility of getting reimbursed for some of the requirements that we're putting in place. And under Advocate for Proposition 1 monies, I added stormwater programs. We've been successful with one stormwater grant, and we're hoping after we create that plan that we can also go after implementation funds. A little bit farther below, support the creation of a Ukiah Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency Joint Powers Authority and the collaborative development of a groundwater sustainability plan for the Ukiah Basin. I would also propose adding language about upcoming basins. There'll be
I was
a
just going to ask for that
Yeah.
because we will be going through a re-ranking of the basins, and different ones that come to mind that they're looking at perhaps
Yeah.
would be Sunell Valley, Potter Valley, Anderson Valley. So it's, I'd like to expand that to countywide, and I don't know how
We
you
can
do,
we can definitely
what
do
language
that.
to use, but I certainly think that's a smart thing to do. So we're prepared to take action.
It seems like we're going to have more basins. And I think we might have a better idea in December, but in 2017, they're supposed to have the partially revised bulletin out.
Right.
I removed engaging in the rulemaking process for DWR in the state for SGMA regulations. Those have been adopted, and those came into effect in June, so we'll be working from those.
And I would like to mention the fact that for any basin that's put on probation or a water basin that is not organized, an agency, GSA, that I guess it's out for public comment, but the fee schedule from the state in order to step in is out there for public comment.
And then below that, a few bullet points down in red, engage in the operating relicense process for FERC project number 77, the Potter Valley Hydraulic Project, since we'll be going into relicensing. And that's it for the changes to water, and I'll add in the language for the potential basins that could come into Sigma. If you go to page 9, we'll see some just cleanup language from marijuana to cannabis. We added in another bullet point, support the Children's Health Committee's policy statement on marijuana and youth adopted by the Mendocino County Board of Supervisors on August 16th, 2016. So we'll add that in. Just a couple additions, a few down, advocate for federal and state legislation, and we included funding to combat illegal trespass cultivation and of cannabis on private and public lands. We added the State Water Resource Control Board to the list of agencies that we'd work with in addressing these illegal grows or bad environmental practices. And supporting the administrative penalties that cover the cost of site cleanup. Usually those are used by the state in terms of collecting money to be able to do the cleanup, and we've also talked about at a local level developing an administrative penalties for our local cultivation program. And that's it on cannabis. I don't know if you have any additional items you'd like to add. We still have language in terms of the rulemaking and regulatory process of staying engaged with the state.
Just one clarifying. So I presume that the Children's Health Committee's policy statement actually says marijuana. I don't know if we want to change it to cannabis. But I assume that also covers the issue of urging the state not to have packaging that's marketed towards kids.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it was all encompassing.
Mm-hmm.
Because actually, I think it went back to be worked on to include a lot of that.
Yeah, about a lot of it around the edibles of kids, making sure that I think there was even stuff about paraphernalia in the windows
Yes.
and distances.
Yeah.
So, and we're taking that into account as we advocate at the state level and work on our local regulations. And we could see a lot more of that in the future in terms of if legalization does happen. We'll probably also see a movement of that like we did with tobacco. And those are really the major changes that came up. There's a few under livability on the 13th to bridge the digital divide and having art and culture exhibits at public buildings. I know that's been, the library has some public art, but possibly having more of that in our buildings. And supporting legislation that provides local, federal, and state funding for parks and recreation programs.
Could I take you back for just
Sure.
a minute? And actually, my iPad number says page 8 of 11, but let me go to the bottom. It's actually on page 10. And
Agriculture?
Page 10.
Uh-huh. Economic and community development.
This is, yes. And the first bullet point, support continued state funding for California Coastal Commission and for the local coastal program, local assistance grant program. We should also have the California Coastal Conservancy in that, because their funding has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think it would be good to add them.
California Coastal Conservancy?
Yes.
So maybe we could even break it out of the separate bullet point, because I think the commission dollars they're talking about helps pay for the county or a city local coastal plan update,
Yes,
update.
yes.
And I think the Conservancy, their funding generally is more about land acquisition or trail development. So if we could maybe separate.
Well, they do restoration.
But they're not, but their grants are not really for the plan
You
update.
can
may
do a
keep
separate
it,
bullet
yes.
point right below
So
that
it would
one.
be a new bullet point.
That's kind of it on the major changes that we put in. Like I said, we may get some additional ones from Public Health and HHSA, which I can include when it comes back. But I don't know if you have any other specific things you'd like to see included or changed.
Well, I think one of the ones, and this comes back to cap and trade and how they allocate funding, and I cannot remember for the life of me what they call their evaluation to go over any funding that is requested, and I can't even think of what it, low,
Low carbon.
huh?
Low.
Anyway, it's much different. Their qualifications when they're looking at providing funds for the grant requests, and rural counties never can take advantage of it because when they talk about disadvantaged communities,
It's always
it's
like
basically more urban or influence from being so close to Mexico. So like San Diego and Imperial get great funding where we couldn't qualify. We don't get the points. And it has to do with air quality. And that is up for revision, but they're not budging. The department's not really budging on that. I can bring you some information because we need to push for that.
We can add that in on page 12 under Environment and Public Health.
Okay.
We have a bullet point for advocate for the appropriation of remaining cap and trade funds. I have to update the fiscal year, but auction revenues for essentially local level projects. But we might want another bullet point really advocating for revisions of rules so that rural counties
Can take advantage.
can take advantage of it and be competitive and see more of an equal share of the cap and trade revenues.
And the only rural county that actually receives funding is Imperial because of the language that has to do with air pollution coming in from Mexico. So all the rest of them, however many they are, cannot qualify.
If you can pass along that sheet, we can make sure that we
Okay, I'll
include
get
that
that.
in
I'll get that done.
the environmental section, because that will be important.
And trying to think if I saw anything on homeless, housing needs.
We don't have anything on homelessness, and I think the only thing that we really have is in terms of trying to provide more affordable housing, which is in the platform, but we might want to add something on homelessness and maybe mental health services, and maybe I can talk with Health and Human Services to get some ideas of
I think that would be important
to
because I
add
think
for those two topics.
both of those topics need to be somewhere.
So where in the document, I see the livability section, would it be in there?
for affordable housing.
I'm just trying to figure out where you would put it.
Why don't we let her figure that out and then she can
Yeah.
come back and tell us? But you're right.
We do have some language around economic and community development in terms of housing. So in homeless housing or transitional housing or things like that may fit there in terms of homelessness and mental health services might be more appropriate under environment and public health. We can also make a subcategory for it, but livability, different points can fit in different areas. But I think in terms of like the housing might be more of a community development of trying to provide that, and other types of services under the livability section or public health.
Righty.
Just one final thing on the, maybe under livability, maybe something about workforce housing also, if we
Sure.
don't have that now.
Good point.
I mean, I saw a newspaper article was predicting that the only thing that was likely in the foreseeable future to constrain California's economic growth was the lack of workforce housing. So I think that was part of the reason why the governor signed the accessory dwelling unit law, and I think there was maybe one other housing law that they just signed. So,
And we did learn at all about tiny homes in our CRC conference, so we could explore other options of things to add in turn, allowing more accessory units or more housing
And
options in
In
rural
the
America.
in the question, and the reason I wanted to go see the tiny house, Sarah fell in love with it, and actually so did I. Because the question of these tiny houses, if you watch H&G TV or DYI or whatever it is, when those programs come up on tiny houses, I'm going, why don't they just buy a trailer? But after being in that one, and I've seen the different styles, but after being in that one, oh my gosh, it was so cute. Now I totally understand.
Yeah, it's like a granny unit without having to do some of the additional planning and building steps of an actual house.
But I'm not quite sure if their theory of you can just park it on your place and you don't need to go get a permit is really going to work. Oh, gosh. Okay.
Yeah, but I would support something along those lines.
Something about, yeah, to kind of match what the governor's doing, so we can hopefully make it easier for people for us to have more housing options.
So I want to ask, any public comment? How about you, Nicole?
Are you looking into a tiny house?
Oh, gosh. Okay, that looks about it, but we need to go forward on this agenda. We need to approve past minutes. I read them all. I don't think I saw any mistakes. Did you?
No, I'll move to approve.
Okay, I guess I get to second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Public expression. Anyone with public expression, please come forward. Not seeing anyone. Do we have any announcements or matters from staff?
When would you like to see do we have a standing committee meeting in November? Maybe.
The calendar doesn't show one for November. I think that was an optional month.
Because we can just put this on the agenda for if we're having one in December. I'm not really.
We have it, well, we have on
Do
the
we have
calendar December 12th.
12th.
Okay. Because we can maybe shoot for it coming back on December 12th.
Oh, we don't
Or
have
earlier?
one. We don't have one in November?
I think it was left as optional because of the, is there a CSAC meeting of that month?
CSAC is the first week in December.
We actually leave right after
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, the 24th.
I think that's why there was none in November, is because of Thanksgiving and then the CSAC meeting at the end of November, early December.
Well, if we're going to add to the legislative platform, then do we want it to come back to committee, or do we want to wait until December and then it could be either on the 19th, 20th
We can
board
maybe
agenda?
shoot for the.
I think we have time
yeah,
to
we
do
can,
December.
We can bring back the final
Yeah.
platform at maybe the second meeting in December, so you guys have enough
The
time to
12th?
meet once
Okay,
before.
sounds good.
Okay.
Does that work for
Yeah.
you? All righty. So, matters from staff? No? That's it? Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned at 2:45.